Richard Harrington had been standing at the edge of the garden for 4 minutes before he understood what he was looking at. He had come looking for Jane. The nanny had lost track of her 20 minutes ago. The resort grounds were large, and Jane had a way of moving through spaces without announcing herself. The specific quiet of a child who had learned that silence was its own kind of navigation. He had been walking the garden path when he saw them through the hedge gap. 40 feet away, a black man in his early 40s in work clothes, kneeling beside an open irrigation line, tools arranged in a precise row beside him, working with the focused economy of someone who did this every day. And beside him, close, not touching, the specific proximity of a child who has found a location and decided to stay in it. His daughter. Jane was talking. Richard stood completely still. He had not heard his daughter's voice in 4 months. 119 days of complete silence. Through 3 therapists, 2 specialists, 1 evaluation that Catherine had refused to complete. Through dinners and bedtimes and car rides, and mornings where he had tried every register he knew and received nothing back. 119 days. And here was his daughter in the grass, beside a maintenance worker he did not know, her mouth moving, words coming out, a conversation happening at a volume he could not hear from 40 feet away. He did not move. He understood instinctively that moving might stop it. Behind him he heard Catherine's footsteps on the path. She had been looking from the other direction, the nannies having split up to cover the grounds. She stopped beside him. He felt rather than saw her look past him to the garden. Felt rather than heard the small sound she made. Her hand went to her mouth. They stood together watching their daughter speak to a stranger, and neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke, and the garden continued in the late afternoon light, as though nothing extraordinary was happening in it. Which was, Richard would later understand, exactly the point. James Lonne had arrived at the Crestview that morning the way he arrived every morning. In his truck at 7:15, maintenance log checked, day's work identified and sequenced before he left the vehicle. 3 items: the East Terrace balustrade, the North Wing water pressure, and the irrigation fitting in the South Garden that had been flagging on the system for a week and needed replacing before it became a more expensive problem. He worked through the first 2 items with the unhurried precision of a man for whom competence was not something he performed. It was simply what Tuesday looked like. By early afternoon he was in the South Garden with the irrigation fitting, his tools arranged beside him, kneeling in the grass with the specific physical ease of a man who spent most of his working life below the level of the things he was fixing. He had been working for 40 minutes when the girl sat down. He did not hear her approach. She moved quietly, the specific quiet of a child who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He simply became aware, in the peripheral way you become aware of things that do not require immediate response, that someone had sat down in the grass, approximately 6 feet to his left. He looked. A small girl in a white dress, 6 years old perhaps, dark hair, a small smooth stone in her right hand, pale gray, held with the specific care of something that mattered. She was looking at the irrigation line, with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what she was seeing. James looked at her for a moment. Then he went back to work. He did not tell her to move. He did not perform welcome. He did not ask if she was lost or if she needed help finding her parents. She did not appear to need any of those things. She appeared to need to sit in the grass beside someone who was working, and he was working, and the grass was available. This seemed sufficient. She watched him for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because he had been tracking the irrigation fitting replacement against his afternoon schedule. and he noted the time when she sat down the way he noted everything. Not obsessively, simply accurately, the habit of a man for whom precision was a form of respect for the work. At 11 minutes, she said, "Does it hurt, the pipe?" James looked at the corroded fitting in his hand, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it was a serious question, in its way, and she had asked it seriously. "I think it was uncomfortable for a while," he said. "Now it's going to be fine." She nodded, looked at the fitting. "I'm Jane," she said. "I'm James," he said. She stayed for the rest of the afternoon. If something in this opening is already sitting with you, if you feel what is happening in that garden, hit the like button right now. Subscribe if you have not already. We tell stories like this every single week, and we do not want you to miss a single one. And drop your country in the comments. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every one. Now, Richard Harrington goes to the resort manager. Richard found Gerald at the front desk and asked about the maintenance worker in the south garden. Gerald told him what he knew. 9 years of service, exemplary record, never a complaint, trusted by the resort completely. A man named James Lonne. Richard listened, nodded, asked for the reassignment. Gerald hesitated in the specific way of a resort manager who understood exactly what was being asked and why, and could see at least 2 problems with it, one operational, one human, and was weighing which one he was permitted to name. He named the operational one. James was the only person who knew the irrigation system well enough to complete the work currently underway. He suggested a compromise. James would complete the necessary work and then stay to his other assignments, away from the family areas. Richard agreed. That evening at dinner, Jane did not speak. She sat between her parents at the table and was silent in the way she had been silent for 4 months. Complete, contained, the silence of a child who had gone somewhere interior and had not yet found her way back. Except that Catherine knew Jane had found her way back this afternoon, briefly, in a garden, beside a man named James Lonne, and she watched her husband not mention this, and not mention the reassignment, and not mention the voice she had heard her daughter using for the first time in 119 days. After Jane was put to bed, Catherine sat across from Richard in the suite's sitting room. "You're going to have him reassigned," she said. "I already did," Richard said. Catherine looked at her husband, at the man she had been married to for 23 years, and who she loved, and who she knew better than he knew himself, in certain specific ways that their marriage had surfaced over time. "Richard, she doesn't know him, Catherine. She talked to him. She talked to a stranger. She talked," Catherine said. "That's the whole sentence. She talked." Richard looked at his glass, said nothing. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then she went to bed. Neither of them slept well. The next morning, Jane was gone from her room before her nanny woke. She was found, 20 minutes of quiet but increasingly urgent searching later, in the south garden, sitting beside James, who had arrived at 8 to continue the irrigation work. She was speaking. He was working and listening, and occasionally responding with the unhurried attention of a man who had nowhere more important to be than here. The nanny reported this to Catherine. Catherine went to the garden herself. She stood at the edge of the hedge and watched her daughter speak to James with the specific open ease of a child who had recovered something she thought was lost, not performing, not being coaxed. Simply speaking, the way you speak when the person beside you makes speaking feel like the most ordinary and available thing in the world. She watched for 4 minutes. Then she walked forward. James saw her coming and stood. the instinctive physical courtesy of a man who understood the dynamics of the space he worked in. Jane saw her mother and went quiet. Not hostile, simply quiet, the way a radio goes quiet when the frequency shifts. Catherine crouched to Jane's level. "Good morning, sweetheart." Jane looked at her, did not speak. Catherine looked up at James. "I'm Catherine Harrington, Jane's mother." "James Lonne," he said. "Maintenance." "I know," Catherine said. She looked at Jane. At the small, smooth stone Jane had set beside James's tools, placed there deliberately, in the specific way of a child marking a location as safe. "What were you talking about?" Jane looked at James. James looked at Jane. She was asking about the irrigation system, how the water gets from the main line to the garden. Catherine looked at her daughter. "Did you learn something?" Jane looked at her mother for a moment. The long, careful look of a child deciding how much of her interior world to bring forward. "Water goes where it's supposed to go," Jane said, "if the pipes are right." Catherine held it together, the child psychologist and the mother both receiving that sentence at the same time, and both understanding it, and neither of them quite able to speak around it immediately. "That's true," Catherine said finally. "That's exactly true." Richard found out that Jane had gone back to the garden, that Catherine had gone herself and watched, that Jane had spoken, again naturally without coaxing. He also found out that the reassignment had not been completed, that James was still in the south garden, that his daughter had spent the morning there. He went to Gerald. The reassignment was to be completed immediately. James was to move to indoor maintenance assignments for the remainder of the Harrington family's stay. If James had questions, he should be told it was a guest preference. No further explanation required. Gerald executed the instruction. James received the reassignment that afternoon. He did not ask questions. He did not push back. He gathered his tools from the south garden and moved to his indoor assignments with the quiet acceptance of a man who had spent 40 years, understanding that in spaces like this, the guests made the decisions, and the staff lived with them. He had known when it started that it would cost him something. He had not expected it to cost this much. He had not expected to mind this much. He put his tools away correctly and went to work on the north wing electrical panel, and did not think about the small, smooth stone he had watched a child set beside his tools 2 mornings in a row. The next morning Jane went to the garden. James was not there. She sat in the grass in the place where he had been working, held her small, smooth stone, waited. The garden was correct and manicured, and entirely without the thing that had made it matter. After 40 minutes, she walked back to the resort building. She did not speak for the rest of the day. That evening, Catherine sat with Jane through bath time, and a story, and lights out, and the silence between them was the old silence, complete, heavy, the 4-month silence that had cracked open for 2 days, and had now closed again, as though the crack had never happened. She went to Richard. "Bring him back," she said. "Catherine." She didn't speak today. Catherine's voice was completely level. The levelness cost her something. He could hear the cost underneath it. Not once. Not a single word. "You moved him yesterday." She didn't speak today. "I am a child psychologist, Richard. I know what that sentence means, even if you are choosing not to." Richard looked at his wife. "She's 6. She doesn't know what she needs. She knows exactly what she needs." Catherine did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "That is the only thing she has been telling us for 4 months. We simply could not hear it until now." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know this man," he said. "Jane does," Catherine said. "That seems to be sufficient." She left him with that. Right here. Before you see what Richard does next, subscribe if you have not already. Because what this father does in the next 10 minutes is the kind of moment we tell stories for. Hit the bell. Drop your country in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. We are reading every single one. Now, Richard goes to find James. He did not send Gerald. He went himself. James was in the north wing, replacing a light fixture panel, when Richard found him. James saw him coming through the corridor and stopped working. Stood, waited. The specific waiting of a man who understood that whatever was coming was above his pay grade and required his complete attention and his complete stillness simultaneously. Richard stopped 6 feet away. His arms were crossed. He looked at James for a moment, at the work clothes, the tools, the complete absence of performance or agenda, the face of a man who was not trying to be anything other than what he was. Then, deliberately, visibly, the decision requiring something from him, Richard uncrossed his arms. "My daughter," he said. "She hasn't spoken in 4 months." James said nothing. He already knew. Resort staff talked, quietly and carefully, the way people talked about guests they were concerned about. "She spoke to you," Richard said. "Yes," James said. "Why?" James looked at him. The honest answer and the careful answer were the same answer, and he gave it simply. "I don't know. I just let her be where she was." Richard looked at this man, at everything he was, and everything he was not, at the complete absence of method, or framework, or therapeutic approach, at a man who had not tried to help his daughter, who had simply worked and let a child sit beside him and spoken to her the way you spoke to someone who was simply there. "She went back to the garden yesterday morning," Richard said. "You weren't there." "I was reassigned," James said, simply. No accusation. The fact was sufficient. "I did that," Richard said. "Yes," James said. Richard was quiet. He looked at the light fixture panel, at the tools arranged with the specific precision of a man who treated his work with respect, at the corridor, quiet, institutional, the back of the resort that guests rarely saw. "Would you be willing," Richard said, and the words cost him something that was visible in the specific careful way he assembled them, "to come back to the garden tomorrow morning?" James looked at him. "That's my job. I go where the work is." "The work is in the garden," Richard said. "I'll let Gerald know." He turned to leave. Stopped. He did not turn back. "Mr. Lonne, thank you. I'll be in the garden at 8, James said. James was in the garden at 8. Jane arrived at 8:12, running, which she did not usually do, the specific running of a child who has been told something good is going to happen and believes it entirely. She stopped when she saw him, went completely still, then walked the rest of the way, because she had run, because she felt like it, and she was walking the rest because she chose to. She sat beside him, set her small, smooth stone beside his tools. "You came back," she said. "I work here," James said. "I go where the work is." She considered this. "The work is here?" "Today it is," he said. She nodded, watched him work for a moment. "My dad sent you away," she said. James continued working. "I'm here now," he said. She looked at the stone beside his tools. "He came to find you," she said. Not a question. "He did," James said. Jane was quiet for a moment. The considered quiet of a child processing something important. "He doesn't always know what to do." "My dad." "Most people don't," James said. "They figure it out." "Do you think he'll figure it out?" James looked at his work. gave the question the time it deserved. "I think he already is," he said. Jane nodded. Set the stone back beside his tools. Opened the small picture book about gardens that Catherine had given her that morning. Quietly, without explanation, simply setting it on Jane's bed and leaving it there. The specific offering of a mother learning to give things without requiring anything back from the giving, she read. He worked. The garden was exactly what it had always been. The same plants, the same light, the same irrigation system slowly being made correct, and was entirely different from what it had been 3 days ago, because the two people in it were different from what they had been 3 days ago. Richard and Catherine watched from the garden path. Together, not hiding, simply present. The specific presence of two people who have stopped performing observation and started actually seeing. Richard's arms were not crossed. Catherine's hand found his. They watched their daughter read beside a man she had known for less than a week and spoke to more freely than she had spoken to anyone in 4 months. They watched James work, and occasionally speak, and occasionally listen, and never once make Jane feel that her presence was a gift he was receiving, rather than simply a fact he was accepting. "He just lets her be," Catherine said quietly. Richard watched James for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I'm learning." The Harrington family's stay lasted 11 more days. Every morning Jane was in the garden by 8:15. On the 4th day, Catherine came to the garden and sat, not watching from the path, sitting, in the grass nearby, which cost her something in the specific way that things cost us when we have to change the way we love someone to love them correctly. James nodded at her. Jane looked at her mother. Did not go quiet. "Mom," Jane said. "James says water goes where it's supposed to go, if the pipes are right." "I remember," Catherine said carefully. "I think people are like that too," Jane said. "They go where they feel like they can." Catherine looked at James. He was looking at his work. But something in the set of his expression suggested he had heard that and found it accurate. On the 7th day, Richard came to the garden. He did not stand on the path. He walked in, which required something from him that was visible in how he walked. The specific physical effort of a man entering a space he had decided not to enter, and changing that decision. He sat on the garden bench 20 feet from where James and Jane were working. Jane had started handing James tools, which James accepted without comment, incorporating her into the work with the natural ease of a man for whom assistance was assistance regardless of who was offering it. Richard watched his daughter hand a wrench to a maintenance worker and receive a quiet word of thanks, and look up with the specific pride of a child who has been useful in a real way. He watched this for a long time. He did not cross his arms. On the final morning, Catherine found James in the maintenance office returning equipment from the completed garden work. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay," James said. "What did you do?" James set down the equipment, thought about the question. The real version of it, not the deflection he had given Richard, because Catherine was asking something more precise and deserved a more precise answer. "I didn't do anything," he said. "I just didn't ask her to be anything different from what she was. Most people ask her to be louder. I didn't need her to be louder." Catherine was quiet. The child psychologist and the mother receiving this simultaneously, and both of them understanding it, and one of them finding it professionally clarifying, and one of them finding it the most difficult and the most useful thing she had heard in 4 months. "She's going to miss you," Catherine said. "She'll be okay," James said. She found her voice. "That doesn't go away because I'm not there." "You're remarkably certain about that." "She told me herself," James said. "Yesterday." She said she didn't need me to talk. She just needed to know it was allowed. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Mr. Lonne." "James?" he said. "Thank you, James." The cars were loaded. The departure choreography of a family with resources enough to make leaving look effortless. Luggage, staff, the specific organized exit of people who had been somewhere and were now going somewhere else, and had the infrastructure to make the transition invisible. Jane stood beside the car. She was holding her small, smooth stone. She walked to James, who was on the path with his maintenance log, not positioned there to say goodbye, simply working, the way he was always simply working, and held up the stone. "You should have this," she said. James looked at the stone, at the small hand holding it toward him. "That's yours," he said. "I know," Jane said. "That's why I want you to have it." James looked at her for a moment. Then he held out his hand. She placed the stone in his palm, pale gray, small, smooth, the weight of something a 6-year-old had carried for comfort, and was giving away because she no longer needed it in the same way. Because some of what it had been holding for her had transferred to something else, to the knowledge that her voice was hers, and she could use it anywhere, not only in gardens beside men who did not ask her to be louder. "Thank you, Jane," he said. She nodded, turned, walked back to the car with the specific dignity of a child who has completed something important and knows it. At the car door, she turned back once. "James," she said. He looked at her. "The pipes are right now," she said. She got in the car. James stood on the path and watched the cars move down the resort driveway and disappear through the gate. He opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm, pale gray, the weight of being seen completely and immediately by someone who needed nothing from him except his presence. The weight of being enough, exactly as he was, for exactly who needed him to be. He put the stone in his pocket, picked up his maintenance log, went back to work. If James and Jane's story stayed with you, if something in that garden, in that stone, in the pipes being right moved you, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been told they are not enough for a room they belong in completely. Subscribe if you have not already. We are here every single week with stories that stay with you long after they end. Hit the like button if this one delivered. And drop a comment below. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. Your country, your city. We read every single one, and we want to know exactly who is carrying these stories with us. Until next time, you do not have to be louder. You just have to be where the work is.